Welcome, everyone. I'm Carrie Staten. I'm the director of Mid-Atlantic TAB, which is a collaboration between programs at several universities, including West Virginia University, where we are, Marshall University, the University of Delaware, and Virginia Tech. And we collaborate to provide free technical assistance on all things brownfields, from start to finish, from the site identification part of the process all the way through to fully redeveloped sites. Everything we do is free and funded by the US EPA. And today we're going to talk a little bit about that starting point of identifying brownfields. Next slide. So our speakers today are me. You've already heard from me. That's pretty much my spiel. Kendra is going to tell you everything you need to know about brownfields in your backyard. Kendra is part of our broader team and works with downstream strategies, and I'll let her introduce herself as she gets started.
Great. Thanks, Carrie. Thanks everyone for being here today. I'm happy to be doing this webinar and continue our work with Brownfields Assistance Center. Again, my name is Kendra Hatcher, and I work for a consulting company located in Morgantown, West Virginia called Downstream Strategies. We also have done numerous brownfield projects. We've done assessment grants and cleanup grants, mostly in the Mid-Atlantic region. So today, as we're going to talk about brownfields in our backyard, so I guess we should start talking about what is a brownfield. So I sort of put the official definition here up on the slide in front of you, but basically, when you're looking around your community and you see sites that are blighted, look like they're crumbling, look like they're falling down, look like a place that you don't want to be or don't want to hang out, that's generally a brownfield. Oftentimes, when folks are looking at these sites, they think, that place must be dirty. I don't want to have anything to do with it. It'll never be cleaned up. Examples include things like old industrial sites, old factories that are crumbling down. It can be an old gas station that was around a long time ago, dry cleaners, sites like this. Sometimes these sites can be really dirty and they have a potential for contamination. In some cases, though, they really aren't that bad from an environmental perspective. They just look bad. So people kind of just want to back off and not have anything to do with it. Often, though, these sites are places, they're located in our towns and our communities where, hey, we might want to do something there. Where people had businesses and industry before is often the place that we want to have industry and businesses again. So, as people are thinking about looking in their communities and looking to redevelop and move forward in their communities, these sites become, these high priorities of, hey, wait, we should do something about these sites. So we're going to talk about, as why you would want to look at these sites and understand where all these are located and what those conditions specifically are. So a great way to do that is actually create an inventory of all these different sites in our community. Next slide, please. So why do we want to do an inventory? So as you're starting on your brownfield journey, you want to identify where these different sites are and which ones we should focus on. So this might already have been done by other community planning efforts. If you're sort of leading your brownfields work up, you might already have in your head where a lot of these sites are, but maybe there are other sites that you're not aware of. So, or maybe, you don't necessarily know per se where all of these are, but you just have in your head, there's kind of a lot of sites that are kind of yucky and we need to do something about it. And we want to figure out where we want to focus those efforts. So no matter which stage you are, no matter, whether you know everything about your brownfields in your community or you don't know anything, an inventory can be really helpful. Inventories can also be done at any stage in your brownfield process. And it can also be done at whatever level you are and how many resources you have. So for instance, you're just starting, you're trying to think about, well, maybe we should do a brownfield application. It's a great time to do an inventory. It gives you sort of a plan. It looks great in your application that you have a plan, you know where your sites are, so that you could do it then. Maybe you've submitted your application and you get a lot of nervous energy and you want to use it. Do an inventory. You could start to get yourself oriented, start thinking about the type of sites, where they're located that you want to work on. And it gives you sort of a leg up as well. You can get started before you get awarded that money. Or maybe, you're in a community, you don't have a whole lot of resources. It's totally fine to wait till you get your grant as well. Then you have the opportunity, you could have your consultant that you hire to work on the brownfields, they can help you. And it's also at that point a great way to get your community involved. It kind of fulfills that public involvement component of your grant, but it also gets everybody involved and excited because you have the grant and people can get moving. So let's go to the next slide, please. So Matt, again, you can do it at any stage. It's beneficial and important, and it's just really going to focus your efforts for the funding that you get and longer term redevelopment in your community. Gets everybody involved and sort of going to go through the process of how you do an inventory and the prioritization, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But it helps you figure out where you're going to go and how to move forward in the next steps. Next slide, please. So as Haley mentioned at the beginning, this presentation is going to be available. The slides will be available and this presentation is going to be available. So we sort of outline things so you can even use this as a resource if you're starting to put together your brownfield planning. It's also important to, as you mentioned, you can do this at any stage in your brownfield planning. It's also important to note that you can redo these steps whenever it makes sense. Maybe if you did it prior to getting your funding, it was a little bit more limited because your resources were limited. Then you get this money from your assessment grant, and then you might be able to redo it and bolster it and provide more information or gather more sites. Once you have your prioritization sort of set up, which we'll talk about how you can do that, you can also add sites sort of more quickly and efficiently once you have things together. So again, it shouldn't be something to be afraid of, to get started at any time, and it's totally scalable based on the resources that you have available at the time. So we're going to go through each of these steps as we sort of have listed out here. So if you want to go to the next slide, please, Haley. So the first step generally is we're going to get together. We're going to talk to some folks, figure out what people see and where they see sites that are areas of concern in their community. We can have a meeting, go buy some coffee, get some cookies, get everybody to come sit down together and talk about areas of concern in your community. Bring some maps, take some notes, sort of record what people are thinking. This can be everything from, you want your local officials, if you can get them involved, maybe community planners, developers, property owners, let them come in and give you their feedback. But it's also really important for the community. What do people see, next door to them? Or where do they see our sites? So a meeting is a really great way to do this. But another, part of that meeting can be, I think as Carrie likes to do, the walkabout. So, we can sit in a coffee shop or you can sit in a meeting room and talk about these things. But one really good way to do this is to get out and actually walk around, look in your community. That also gets you, it's a point of conversation and visualization. As you're walking around and looking at sites that could potentially be cleaned up, what is the future? What does it look like on your main street when you have blighted properties that are removed? What is the vision for folks? And it can get people really excited and get people involved as moving through this process. So I think, my point is don't be afraid to get out and, get people involved and get feedback and see what your community actually looks like. Next slide. I guess that's sort of, I'm moving on from that as well, but, and also just drive around, if people have given you information, maybe you can have a group setting. If you're the person who's in charge of putting this together, maybe individually or just, just a couple people, drive around, get information, start to put things on a map. Think about other places that maybe have not necessarily been identified in your walkabout, but where are areas that might have previously been used for industrialization. They might not be super obvious. So just think about maybe where there were former factories, for instance, along a riverfront. So where are these areas that could be redeveloped that are currently being underused right now? Next slide, please. So now that you've gone out and had coffee and cookies and you've walked around and talked to everybody, now it's time to get to work a little bit. There is a little bit of work that you're going to have to do. If we want to use all this information that we've gathered, we need to record it in some ways. Again, if you're doing this after your grant, this is a good use of your consultant. They can help you put things together. There are fancy programs like Regrid or ArcGIS that you can gather all this information, but you don't necessarily have to have all of that. Being able to record information, even as simple as a spreadsheet, is totally fine. Right now there's, with the internet and, a lot more communities are putting things online. So finding parcel information, you don't have to necessarily go to the courthouse and gather a bunch of information, but you want to be able to take, you go to a site, you want to know what the address is, you want to know where it's located, and you want to get a little information if you can. So for instance, in your parcel databases, you can also often find size of the property, what's available, are the buildings still there? Sometimes some parcel information does have condition assessments, not always, but all of that information could be recorded sort of in a spreadsheet form and sort of list out all that basic information. And again, you want to know where it is. Where is it located? Are these areas, but that people are going to drive through Main Street and recognize them? So now the reason that you want to get all of this into a spreadsheet or a database in some manner is because once we get all of that info and take it, what are we going to do with it? We recognize these sites, we know they're a problem. In some cases, there might be too many that we could even possibly do anything about. So we might have to narrow it down based on our funding. So we want to go through a prioritization process to figure out what areas do we want to focus on. And we could do that. One way to do that is I'm going to walk through that process a little bit, but one way to do that is basically score properties. We can use a numeric assessment and go through and based on our properties, give a score for each of the different properties and literally add up a score. When you get to the end, areas that score higher would be higher priorities and sites that are lower, maybe at this point are highest priorities right now. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about priorities, what are we interested in? And, these are sort of some basic ones that I think a lot of people would consider when we're looking at properties. There might be different conditions in your particular community that, might be different. So you certainly can make this based on what you're interested in looking at in your community. I think one thing that's important to point out is, you want to get your priorities straight and you sort of want to think about how you would, determine your scoring before you go through that process. So things that we might want to think about are health and safety hazards. Is this property, is it dangerous? Is it a hazard to the community? Redevelopment, reuse areas, is this in a high priority area? Visibility, can people see it as they're driving down Main Street? What condition is the property in? Is it even possible to save it? And basically how viable is a property for redevelopment? So go ahead, next slide, please. So I'm just going to go through a couple of examples of how you could score these. And I think one way that I would visualize doing this is literally have an address of a property, and you could, if you have a spreadsheet, you have your address and you could have different columns and you could put each of these in a column and give your different score. So that way, when you get sort to the end, you could add all these scores up. In this case, the way that I have this laid out, the higher the score, the more likely that it would be for a higher priority. But again, you can sort of tailor it to how it makes sense to you. To keep things simple, we just have 1, 2, and 3 numbers, but maybe if through your scoring process you want to expand that, that's certainly fine too. Again, this is just an example. So for this, for instance, with health and safety. So a number 1 might be, there don't seem to be any health or safety hazards present. The building looks okay, it's not falling down, it's not crumbling on folks. Where the other side of that, With the highest score might be there's infestation, illegal use, the building's collapsing, bricks are falling off in the street. So that might be a higher priority site. Next slide, please. Redevelopment and reuse potential. Now, this is maybe something that would be required for someone more in the know in the community. This one might be a little bit harder, for instance, for general public to score, but this would be something maybe your elected officials might have some additional feedback in. But redevelopment and reuse potential is, that there really isn't much redevelopment potential. For example, there might be a house that looks really decrepit and people aren't necessarily happy with it in their neighborhood, but that doesn't mean that it has high redevelopment or reuse potential for the community. The other side of that is, there's a building, maybe it's not in the best shape, but people are really excited. It's in a really prime location. Lots of people are interested in redeveloping that property. Next slide, please. Another thing to consider is the visibility. Again, starting off, as our walkabout, as you're walking about in your community, do you see a lot of blighted properties? Is this the first thing that people see when they're coming into to your community? So, those that are very highly visible would score much higher on this priority scale, as opposed to, again, one that's maybe tucked away. Next slide. Property condition. Now, this one, again, might need a little bit more feedback. As I mentioned, some parcel data, some communities record property condition assessments, so you can get some feedback there. But even just visually, does it look like it's collapsing? Does a building have a roof? Are there cracks in the foundation? That type of thing. So, or is it pretty solid? Looks like maybe a little bit of cleanup, replacing some windows, things like that. It could be pretty easy to redevelop that property. And next slide, please. The next is sort of affordability or viability. So this kind of goes back to, with the concept of the brownfields, is this actually a contaminated property or does it just look bad? So properties that really have a lot of contamination, this, affordability can be a real issue. Is there a lot of soil that needs to be removed? Is there remediation that needs to occur? Is there groundwater contamination that would need to be dealt with, or would limit the redevelopment of the property? Or maybe there isn't as much contamination as thought. The property just needs some cleanup and it could be redeveloped. Or the other option is there funding available? The brownfield grants are a good way to get started, go through the process of assessing and getting it to a point. You can move to the next stage for cleanup, and there could be funding for cleanup. The other option is private investment. Are there folks that are really interested in, they're really willing to put money into a property, no matter what the condition is. So the affordability, and sort of viability, is this project even able to move forward? So again, all of these can sort of be adjusted a little bit based on your starting point and what resources you have available. And oftentimes they're going to have to be changed throughout the process. You could go through the entire prioritization process and find out, oh, this is a high priority site. It's in a prime location. It's, financially, it's viable. People are interested in it. But then you have a property owner who's a real curmudgeon and isn't interested in engaging in this process at all, and kind of puts you back to square one. But the opposite side of that, you could go through a process. It's a way to engage folks to say, hey, you have this property. It's in a high priority area. There's interest in redeveloping it. What can we do? And the property owner might not know anything. They might not understand the resources that are available. They might not have any sense before that there was interest in the property or any way to move the property forward. So, it could really certainly go either way for encouraging taking that next step in redevelopment of that particular project.